On Christmas Eve, a millionaire came home and found the 7-year-old daughter of his cleaner intently writing a letter to Santa Claus. Smiling discreetly, he thought it was just another childish wish for toys. Minutes later, he witnessed the girl's mother discovering the letter and forcing her to throw it in the trash. Curious, the millionaire picked it up, and as he read the first words, he couldn't hold back and began to cry. On the eve of Christmas, the Vance estate shimmered under an almost surreal splendor. Golden lights twined around every column and window, and the scent of fresh pine mixed with cinnamon and ginger permeated the heated air. However, for Arthur Vance, the man who had built a business empire from modest seed capital, transforming it into an enviable fortune through shrewd investments in stocks and real estate, the glow was merely a backdrop to his unshakable obsession with work. His net worth was vast, granting him a comfort few could dream of, but the cost was a profound disconnection from everything not related to his business. He had so much money, he even held some in Bitcoin, a technological curiosity that, to him, was just another way to accumulate wealth. Arthur, a man in his 40s with graying temples and eyes that rarely strayed from his tablet screen, moved through the polished corridors with the urgency of someone always on a deadline. His generosity was often a calculated gesture, like the substantial donation he'd made to the city's holiday charity drive. A significant amount, yes, but one he saw more as a social obligation than an act of true altruism. This same superficial generosity extended to his employees, offering generous bonuses without ever truly seeing the lives behind the uniforms. That December morning, as he reviewed complex spreadsheets detailing the cash flow of one of his latest acquisitions, he barely noticed the silent entrance of Cecilia, his housekeeper, and a small shadow that accompanied her. Cecilia, a middle-aged woman with hands calloused by life and a gaze that held the depth of many experiences, had asked for special permission to bring her daughter, Sophia, just 7 years old, to help with preparations for the Christmas party Arthur and his wife. Isabella, planned to host Isabella, in fact, was the one truly dedicated to organizing the festivities, trying in vain to pull Arthur into the spirit of the celebration. Sophia was a girl with large, curious eyes that absorbed every detail of the massive mansion with a mix of fascination and shyness. She wore a simple but immaculate dress, carefully ironed by her mother. Her movements were almost imperceptible as she helped Cecilia polish the gleaming silverware in the dining room. Arthur, oblivious to the small presents, remained immersed in his numbers. The profits from his investment funds and the returns on his assets seemed to be the only things that truly captured his attention. Later, while heading to his study for a conference call about the stock market, Arthur glimpsed Sophia sitting on the floor of the enormous living room, illuminated by the soft light filtering through the garland-adorned windows. She was hunched over a crumpled piece of paper, her eyes fixed on the words she traced with a small, worn-down pencil. Arthur's heart, a muscle so accustomed to the coldness of business, felt a slight tremor. He smiled discreetly, a rare expression on his face, and moved away without a sound. A letter to Santa Claus, no doubt, he thought, remembering his own children, who, years ago, would fill pages with outlandish requests for expensive toys and the latest electronics. Thanks to the inheritance Arthur was already building for them. The sight of Sophia writing seemed like a distant echo of a simpler childhood, one he had almost forgotten amidst his multi-millionaire routine. However, the tranquility of that moment was abruptly shattered. Arthur was on the phone, discussing the next steps for one of his assets, when he heard Cecilia's voice, loud and charged with an emotion he had never witnessed. "Sophia, what are you doing? How many times have I told you not to waste time with nonsense, especially with Mr. Vance around? You know we don't have time for this." Cecilia's tone was a mix of anger and desperation, and Arthur flinched, feeling a pang of discomfort. He glanced into the living room, where Sophia stood, her face streaked with tears, the small piece of paper still in her hands. Cecilia, with a brusque movement, snatched the letter from the girl. "Throw this away now. We don't need illusions here, honey. We need to work." With a heavy heart, Sophia obeyed, her small hands trembling as the crumpled paper fell into the wicker trash can. Her shoulders shook with suppressed sobs, and she cast a look at the bin as if she were throwing away a piece of herself. Cecilia pulled her gently but firmly away from the room, and the two disappeared through the back door, leaving a heavy silence in the mansion. Arthur hung up the phone, the conversation about investments and dividends now irrelevant. Something in Sophia's eyes had struck him deeply, a fragility so palpable it contrasted violently with the opulence that surrounded him. An uncontrollable curiosity, something rare for a man interested only in numbers and assets, drew him to the trash can. With a sigh, he reached in and retrieved the crumpled paper. What could be written there to cause such a reaction in the mother and daughter? Surely, just another childish request for a doll or a silly little game. But as he unfolded the paper, his eyes scanned the words written in an unsteady, childish hand, and what he read left him paralyzed, in shock. There were no requests for toys, nor for candy, nor for anything that could be bought with the vast wealth of his net worth. There was something much, much deeper, something that tore through the bubble of privilege in which he lived, exposing a cruel and unimaginable reality. The billionaire, accustomed to dealing with major deals and astronomical figures, felt completely disarmed by those few lines. His world, once so secure and predictable, was about to be turned upside down by a simple letter to Santa Claus that should never have been read. Arthur Vance felt the air thin in his lungs, as if the luxury around him was suddenly suffocating him. The words, written with the innocence of a 7-year-old, burned in his eyes, a silent indictment of his own privileged existence. The childish handwriting trembled as it asked Santa Claus not for a toy, nor a new dress, but for a roof over their heads. "Dear Santa," the letter read, "Mommy and I need a new home. Our old one is falling apart, and the landlord said we have to leave soon because Mommy doesn't have enough money to pay. Please help us find a warm place to live for Christmas." The brutal reality of Sophia's request hit Arthur with the force of a punch to the gut. He, a man whose net worth was so vast he could buy houses, entire buildings, and who owned assets worth millions in different currencies, had never contemplated the possibility of someone not having a place to live. His vast capital, accumulated through years of aggressive investment and stratospheric stock market profits, seemed useless, almost obscene, in the face of such a basic and desperate need. Why had this reality never reached him? The answer was simple and painful. His bubble. The golden bubble that protected him from the real world, fueled by his obsession with work and a generosity that, he now realized, was purely superficial. He donated, yes, but he never got involved, never looked into the eyes of those he was helping. His money, his fortune, were tools for his comfort and the growth of his empire, not for understanding the suffering of others. As the Vance mansion continued to twinkle with Christmas lights, Arthur felt himself sinking into a disturbing darkness. Sophia's tears and Cecilia's veiled desperation took on a new and terrible meaning. He reread the letter, each word a sharp dart piercing his complacency. How could he have been so blind? The image of little Sophia, with her curious eyes and respectful silence, danced in his mind, now veiled with a sadness he hadn't noticed before. She wasn't just the housekeeper's daughter. She was a child haunted by the prospect of not having a home, a worry that should be foreign to any child, especially during a time of festivities and promise. Driven by a restlessness he had never felt before, Arthur began his discreet investigation. He couldn't approach Cecilia directly. He knew her pride would prevent her from revealing the truth. Using his smartphone, more accustomed to displaying stock charts and cryptocurrency prices, he researched the neighborhood where Cecilia had mentioned living. He discovered it was an area known for old, run-down tenement buildings and precarious housing. Without Cecilia's knowledge, he had one of his drivers pass by the indicated street, disguised, and observe. The report he received the next day confirmed his worst fears. Cecilia's address was a dilapidated building with broken windows and graffitied walls. The driver mentioned seeing a utility shut-off notice hanging on one of the meters and felt the biting cold seeping through the cracks in the walls, even during the day. The description made Arthur's lips tighten. The idea of Sophia sleeping in those conditions, with the winter cold intensifying, turned his stomach. He had invested so much in high-yield projects, accumulated so many assets, and yet one of his direct employees was living in such a desolate situation. The irony of his own wealth and Cecilia's poverty hit him hard. He had funds invested everywhere, gold stored in vaults, and a seemingly inexhaustible cash flow. But none of it could mitigate the pain of a child who couldn't even dream of an ordinary Christmas. Seeing Cecilia the next morning, cleaning the library windows, Arthur felt a mixture of shame and an urgent need to act. He had to talk to her, had to offer help. But how could he do it without wounding her dignity? He approached, tablet in one hand, his heart beating faster than in any multi-million-dollar business meeting. "Cecilia," he began, his voice slightly shaky. "Is everything all right with you and Sophia? I noticed she was a little upset yesterday." Cecilia turned, her eyes tired, but her gaze proud. She wrung the cloth in her hand, and Arthur noticed the tension in her shoulders. "Yes, Mr. Vance. Everything is fine. Just a childish thing. You know how it is. Please don't worry about a thing. I appreciate the concern, but everything is perfectly fine." Her response was firm, an impenetrable wall. Arthur felt a chill. She was denying it. She was denying everything, perhaps afraid the truth would cost her her job. His desire to help clashed directly with her pride and desperation, and he realized the journey to reach Sophia and Cecilia would be far more arduous than he had imagined. He had discovered the truth, but how would he overcome the barrier of mistrust and shame that stood between them? Cecilia's denial, though expected, left Arthur with a lump in his throat. He, who was accustomed to imposing his will in boardrooms and dictating terms in million-dollar contracts, found himself powerless before the quiet determination of a woman just trying to protect herself and her daughter. The facade of "everything is fine" was as fragile as the walls of the tenement where they lived, but Cecilia maintained it with a dignity that Arthur, in his world of wealth and ease, had never needed to display. The irony was cruel. His money, his vast fortune, his robust net worth, which usually opened every door, now seemed like an obstacle, a symbol of an insurmountable distance between him and Cecilia's reality. Arthur spent the next few days immersed in deep reflection, a rarity for a man so focused on business and the growth of his capital. The images of Sophia, first concentrating on her letter, then with tear-filled eyes as she threw it away, haunted him. He tried, several times, to formulate a new approach, to think of how he could offer help without it sounding like humiliating charity. His problem was that he had always dealt with money transactionally, investments in gold, stocks on the exchange, high-yield funds. It was all about return, profit, dividends. It had never been about the human element. He considered offering a substantial raise, but quickly dismissed the idea. Cecilia, in her pride, would likely refuse it, or worse, feel even more ashamed. He thought about depositing money anonymously into an account, but the logistics and the lack of an account in her name stopped him. The complexity of the situation wasn't financial, but emotional and social. His own children, Lucas and Laura, lived in a universe where the biggest concern was the model of the next video game or the trendiest brand of clothing. The idea that a child could be worried about a roof over her head was as alien to them as the notion of having to count coins for bus fare. The first significant obstacle, Arthur realized, was the very interpretation of his help. To him, it was correcting a wrong that he, in his blindness, had allowed. To Cecilia, it could be an affront, a cruel reminder of her vulnerability. He couldn't just write a check and solve the problem as he would in a business deal. This wasn't a stock trade, nor a cryptocurrency investment. It was the lives of two people, and the value there couldn't be measured in dollars or euros. He decided he needed more information, but in a way that wouldn't expose Cecilia. Using his network of contacts, he asked a trusted lawyer to discreetly investigate the tenement situation under the pretext of a potential real estate acquisition in the area. The lawyer, accustomed to dealing with the complex liabilities and assets of Arthur's large companies, was surprised by the request, but followed the instructions. Days later, the report arrived, and its words were another blow. The tenement wasn't just precarious, it was in the advanced stages of eviction. There were accumulated debts for rent and utilities, and the residents were under imminent notice to vacate. The property owner was a man known for his intransigence, focused solely on profit, with little regard for his tenants' conditions. The situation was more dire than Arthur had imagined. Legal threats hung over Cecilia and the other residents, and the deadline for vacating was tight, almost coinciding with Christmas. The lawyer, unaware of the details of Arthur's connection to the case, mentioned that the bureaucracy to reverse such an eviction was a labyrinth, especially without proper legal representation and without the capital to settle the debts. The information brought a new layer of anguish to Arthur. It wasn't just a matter of paying the bills. It was a legal battle, a race against time and against a system that seemed to favor those who already had wealth and make life harder for those struggling to survive. He felt small, despite his vast fortune. His power in the business world, his ability to manage funds and make profitable investments, seemed useless. How could he use his power, his resources, his influence to help a mother and her daughter without stripping them of their dignity? The weeks flew by, and Christmas approached, bringing with it not the expected joy, but a shadow of desperation that Arthur felt growing each day. He looked at the lavish decorations in his mansion, at the expensive gifts already piled under the tree, and felt an emptiness. What did all this opulence mean if, just a few miles away, a child was worried about having a roof over her head? The image of Sophia, her words asking Santa for a house, was a mirror reflecting the fragility of his own understanding of the world. With each day that passed without him finding a solution, Arthur's anguish grew, and a terrible premonition began to form in his mind. Time was running out, and he feared that soon it might be too late for Sophia and Cecilia. Arthur's anguish became a constant companion. The financial spreadsheets, investment reports, and stock market quotes, once his only compass, now seemed pale and meaningless next to the image of little Sophia. With every phone call about his investment funds or the returns on his stocks, he saw the letter in the trash can, the childish words pleading for a home. His superficial generosity, once a source of pride, had turned into a heavy burden of guilt. He was a multi-millionaire with a vast net worth in dollars, euros, gold, and even cryptocurrency, and yet he couldn't find a way to help two people within his sphere of influence. The days of the first week dragged on, marked by Arthur's frantic search for a discreet and effective solution. He tried calling various real estate agents, looking for houses to rent in more modest neighborhoods, hoping Cecilia would accept the offer of a new home. But how to present the proposal without making her feel humiliated? How to explain it was a gift, not a handout? Every idea seemed like a dead end, and the image of the girl, with her look of helplessness, never left his mind. On Tuesday of the second week, Arthur noticed an absence. Sophia was not with Cecilia. The girl, who had previously moved like a silent shadow through the mansion, was now a glaring absence. He looked for her in the hallways, the dining room, the garden, but she wasn't there. A sudden chill ran down his spine. He tried to hide his concern, but couldn't ignore it. When Cecilia came to clean his office, Arthur could no longer contain himself. "Cecilia, where is Sophia today?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but his voice betrayed his anxiety. Cecilia hesitated, her eyes fixed on the floor, a blush creeping up her wrinkled neck. She wasn't feeling well, Mr. Vance. I thought it was best to leave her at home today, but don't worry, she'll be fine tomorrow," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. The excuse sounded forced, and Arthur felt there was something more. His intuition, so sharp for business and identifying profit opportunities, now warned him of imminent danger. He waited for Cecilia to leave and immediately called his lawyer. "I need an update on Cecilia's tenement building. I want to know exactly what's happening," he said, his voice tense. The lawyer, accustomed to Arthur's urgent tone regarding major deals, sensed this situation was different, more personal. The answer came a few hours later, a new blow that hit Arthur with overwhelming force. Cecilia and Sophia had been evicted. The eviction order, which he had underestimated in its complexity, had been carried out. They were homeless. The lawyer's report indicated that after being removed from the tenement, the two had been seen at the reception of a homeless shelter on the outskirts of the city, an overcrowded shelter with minimal conditions, barely able to keep its occupants warm on the cold December nights. Arthur felt himself stagger, evicted. The image of Sophia, homeless, wandering the cold streets before finding a precarious refuge, was a nightmare come to life. He had failed. All his wealth, all his assets, his investment funds, his returns, his capital in stocks, none of it had been enough to protect that child from such a cruel reality. His colossal net worth seemed like a useless burden, a symbol of his ineffectiveness. He remembered his children complaining about the house's heating on a slightly cooler day, and the memory shamed him deeply. Without a second thought, Arthur grabbed his car keys. He didn't call his driver. He needed to go alone, to see with his own eyes. Guided by the address the lawyer had provided, he drove to the city's periphery, leaving behind the glitter of his mansion and the festive lights that seemed to mock his powerlessness. The neighborhood was gray, the streets poorly lit, and the shelter, an old, worn-out building, looked like an island of despair amid the city's indifference. Upon entering the shelter, the smell of disinfectant, mixed with a stuffy odor of bodies and desperation, hit his nostrils. The place was packed. Children played in a corner, oblivious to the gravity of their situations, while adults with lost gazes huddled on makeshift cots. Arthur felt the brutal contrast with his own life, with the airy spaces of his home, with the silence of his offices. His eyes scanned the room, searching for Cecilia and Sophia. And then he saw them. Cecilia was sitting on a wooden bench, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders slumped under the weight of unspeakable pain. Beside her, Sophia lay curled up in a thin blanket, coughing weakly. Her face was pale and sweaty, and her eyes, once full of childish curiosity, were now glazed over, fixed on a distant point. Arthur approached, his heart pounding, a dark premonition taking hold of him. Cecilia lifted her head, and the shock on her face at seeing him there was undeniable. Before he could say anything, Arthur touched Sophia's forehead, and the feverish heat of the girl's skin startled him. He realized there was something much more serious, much more grave than the eviction. Sophia was sick, seriously sick, and guilt weighed on him like a mountain, threatening to crush him completely. The billionaire, accustomed to having control over everything, now faced a situation that his money alone might not be able to solve. Sophia's feverish face was a mirror of his own inadequacy, and he felt a cold despair. a sense of powerlessness he had never experienced in his business life. The burning fever of Sophia's skin under his palm was an electric shock to Arthur. The touch of that small, hot and fragile body completely disarmed his usually controlled demeanor. The world of business, compound interest, dividends, the millions of dollars in funds and stocks, it all evaporated in that instant. All that remained was the image of the little girl, pale and gasping for air, an innocent victim of circumstances that he, in his opulent bubble, had ignored. Guilt hit him with overwhelming force, a wave threatening to drown him in regret. Cecilia, seeing him there amidst that scene of desolation, tried to stand, her wounded dignity showing in her eyes. "Mr. Vance, what are you doing here?" Her voice was a murmur, a mix of surprise and shame. Arthur barely heard her. His eyes were fixed on Sophia. "She has a high fever, Cecilia. We need to get her to a doctor. Now," he said, his voice hoarse, the urgency undeniable. Without waiting for a response, Arthur acted. He knew every second counted. With the help of a shelter worker, he carefully lifted Sophia into his arms. The girl, light and frail, felt almost weightless. He felt the heat of her body against his, and a dry, hoarse cough racked Sophia's small chest, making him shudder. Cecilia, in shock, just followed him, her eyes fixed on her daughter. Arthur carried her to his car, a luxury model that seemed grotesquely out of place in that environment. He sped to the nearest private hospital, the same one where his own children received care. Throughout the journey, Cecilia held Sophia's hand, murmuring words of comfort, while Arthur, with a heavy heart, monitored the girl's every ragged breath. His world was collapsing. The money he accumulated so avidly had always given him a sense of control, but now, faced with the fragility of Sophia's life, he felt utterly powerless. At the hospital, the doctors acted quickly. After a series of tests, the diagnosis was clear and devastating: severe pneumonia, a result of prolonged exposure to the cold and precarious living conditions. The news crushed Arthur. The doctor's words echoed in his mind. Her condition could have been prevented if she'd had access to basic care and adequate housing. That sentence, delivered with clinical coldness, was a verdict for Arthur. He was responsible. His superficial generosity had allowed this. His disconnection from reality had cost far too much. While Sophia was admitted and began receiving treatment, Arthur made a series of calls. He mobilized his lawyers and his team of assistants. He didn't care about bureaucracy or costs. His vast net worth, his assets, his funds, his investments, everything would be at their disposal to save Sophia. He, who controlled fortunes in stocks and cryptocurrency, now wanted only one thing: the health of that child. The next morning, Arthur brought his own children, Lucas and Laura, to visit Sophia at the hospital. He wanted them to understand the reality that existed beyond the gates of their estate. Lucas, a teenager accustomed to the latest gaming consoles and designer clothes, entered the room with an air of bored curiosity. Laura, more sensitive, watched little Sophia in the bed with wide eyes. "This is Sophia, kids. She's Cecilia's daughter, our housekeeper," Arthur explained, his voice gentle. "She's sick because she didn't have a warm place to live, and her little house was falling apart." Lucas, a boy who had never had to worry about anything beyond his own comfort, was visibly shocked. "But, Dad, she didn't have a house. What do you mean?" he asked, his voice suddenly serious. Laura, at 10 years old, held Arthur's hand. "Dad, is that why she had a fever? Why didn't we help sooner?" His children's questions, so direct and innocent, struck Arthur to his core. They reflected the same blindness he had once possessed. His children, accustomed to the luxury of a life where money and fortune were a given, were beginning to question the social inequalities they had never noticed. The important subplot unfolding was the cracking of his own family's bubble of privilege. Sophia's illness was not just transforming Arthur, it was opening his children's eyes to a world they never knew existed. That day, sitting by Sophia's bedside, watching her small chest rise and fall with difficulty, Arthur made a silent promise. It wouldn't just be about the money he could spend, it would be about action, about the social responsibility his wealth entailed. He had a purpose, a goal that surpassed any profit or dividend the stock market could offer. He would save Sophia and somehow reverse the blindness that had prevented him from seeing the suffering around him. But what he didn't know was that the road to Sophia's recovery would be even more arduous, and that new and painful revelations were yet to come, testing the limits of his newfound compassion and his capital. The waiting room of the private hospital, with its polished marble and abstract art, had never felt so cold to Arthur. He and Cecilia waited anxiously for news about Sophia. The hours dragged on, each minute an eternity. The presence of Lucas and Laura, sitting in plush armchairs with worried expressions, was a constant reminder of the painful reality now confronting their family. They, accustomed to the comfort of their opulent lives, were now faced with the harsh reality of inequality, a lesson Arthur hadn't intentionally planned, but which was proving to be powerful. His children, who had access to a guaranteed inheritance and all the financial investments money could buy, were beginning to understand that not all the capital in the world could guarantee health or a safe home. The doctor, a man with a serious expression, finally appeared, bringing with him an air of apprehension. "Sophia is stable, but her condition is delicate," he began, and the hearts of Arthur and Cecilia sank. "The pneumonia is severe, and her lungs are quite compromised. Furthermore, tests have revealed significant chronic malnutrition, which has left her more vulnerable to illness. She is in a critical condition that could have been avoided if she had access to proper nutrition and a healthy environment for a longer period." Those words pierced Arthur like daggers. Not just the recent exposure to cold, but months, perhaps years of deprivation. The image of Sophia, always quiet and with a shy smile, now took on a new and painful meaning. Her energy, her small size for her age, her paleness, it all fit into a cruel puzzle. Cecilia, upon hearing the word malnutrition, collapsed into silent tears, her face hidden in her hands. The shame and pain were palpable, and Arthur felt an impulse to hug her but hesitated, aware of the invisible barrier that still existed between them. He had so much money, so much profit from his businesses, so much gold in storage, and he hadn't noticed the suffering so close to him. A new obstacle arose immediately. The doctor mentioned the need for a prolonged and complex treatment with specific medications and intensive nutritional support. He also warned that Sophia's lack of proper documentation, due to their unstable housing situation, could complicate access to some treatments or support programs. Arthur, accustomed to his wealth, assets, and property opening every door, felt frustrated by the bureaucracy that now stood in their way. His net worth in dollars, his cryptocurrency investments, his stocks on the exchange, they seemed ineffective against the rigidity of the system. Trying to be practical, Arthur turned to Cecilia. "Cecilia, please, let me cover all the expenses. Don't worry about anything. I'll take care of it all," he said, his voice firm, though his heart was in pieces. Cecilia raised her head, her eyes swollen from crying, but with a spark of pride that Arthur recognized. "No, Mr. Vance, I appreciate it. But I can't accept. This is my responsibility. I don't want you to feel obligated or to pity us," she replied, her voice choked but determined. The third obstacle was her resistance, Cecilia's refusal, driven by a pride Arthur both admired and lamented, was an insurmountable wall. She saw the offer as charity, as a reminder of her failure to protect her daughter, not as a gesture of genuine compassion. Arthur realized that direct financial aid wouldn't be enough. It had to be more than that. It had to be a rebuilding of trust, an acknowledgement of dignity. Laura, Arthur's daughter, timidly approached Cecilia. "Mrs. Cecilia, Sophia's going to be okay, right? We really like her," the girl said, her voice soft, her eyes full of tears. Lucas, meanwhile, a bit more reserved but visibly affected, just nodded in agreement. The genuine empathy of his children, without the weight of guilt or pride, was a relief amidst the tension. Arthur knew he had to persist, but in a different way. This Christmas, which was supposed to be just another holiday of luxury and expensive gifts, had become the stage for a battle for a life. The image of Sophia, fragile and unconscious, was a constant reminder of his own transformation. He was no longer the detached multimillionaire. He was a man confronted with the pain of a child and the wounded dignity of her mother. He needed to find a way to break down Cecilia's walls of pride, to navigate the unyielding bureaucracy, and to ensure that Sophia not only survived but had a future, a safe home, and a dignified life. The responsibility now rested on his shoulders, not as a burden but as a purpose. What he didn't know was that soon an unexpected turning point would change the course of everything, revealing that help could come from where it was least expected, and that the real transformation was just beginning. The days dragged on in the second week of December with torturous slowness. Sophia remained in the hospital, her recovery slow and painful, a thin thread of hope amid the uncertainty. Arthur Vance, who once measured time in investment deadlines and business closures, now felt it pass in the cadence of the small patient's heartbeat. The Christmas lights of his mansion, which once represented celebration and opulence, seemed mocking, a brutal contrast to the dimness of the hospital room. His net worth, his fortune accumulated in stocks, gold, and cryptocurrency, felt powerless. Cecilia's refusal to accept direct financial help was a colossal obstacle. A woman of firm principles and unbreakable pride, she didn't want to feel like an object of charity. "Mr. Vance, you've already done so much by bringing my daughter here. I'll find a way," she would repeat, her eyes tearful but firm. Arthur tried to argue, explaining it wasn't pity but social responsibility, a concept he himself was learning to internalize. He, who had accumulated so much capital and lived off interest and dividends for years, now found himself in a position where money was not the solution, but dignity was. It was in this setting of impasse and anguish that the unexpected turning point occurred. One afternoon, while Arthur was in the hospital cafeteria getting coffee for Cecilia, his phone rang. It was Isabella, his wife. She had been with the children visiting Sophia and Cecilia at the hospital, and what she saw there had transformed her in a way Arthur never imagined. Isabella, an elegant and reserved woman accustomed to Arthur's exclusive social circle, had always cared more about appearances than the depths of others. Suffering, her life was adorned with luxury goods, travel, and a lifestyle that Arthur's vast net worth provided. "Arthur, I need you to come here now." Her voice was choked, but there was an urgency and determination he had never heard. "It's about Cecilia and Sophia." Arthur rushed back to Sophia's room, his heart pounding erratically. Upon entering, he saw Isabella sitting next to Cecilia, holding her hand. Lucas and Laura were nearby, their faces serious. Cecilia was visibly emotional, and Isabella had tears in her eyes, but a glint of resolution in her gaze. "Arthur," Isabella began, her voice trembling slightly, "Cecilia was telling me about her home, about Sophia's letter, and about her refusal to accept your help. And I understood why." Arthur looked at her, confused. He expected a reprimand, perhaps another argument about how he had failed. But what came next left him completely stunned. "I spoke with Cecilia for a long time," Isabella continued, squeezing the housekeeper's hand, "and I understood that her dignity is something money can't buy or impose. She doesn't want a handout. She wants a chance. She wants to work for it, to fight for her daughter." A silence filled the room. Arthur couldn't process it. Isabella, the woman who lived in the golden bubble beside him, suddenly seemed to have crossed a barrier. "I have an idea," Isabella went on, her eyes fixed on Arthur's. "We can't just give her money, but we can offer something more. Something that won't make her feel humiliated, but will empower her. I've already looked at some properties, small houses in decent neighborhoods with good infrastructure." She took out her own phone and showed him some photos. "And I have a plan, a business plan, Arthur." Arthur blinked. Isabella talking about a business plan? She, who always let him handle all the finances, all the investments, all the profits from his businesses. "Cecilia is a hard-working and dedicated woman," Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength. "She's always wanted to have her own cleaning business with a team so she could have more time with Sophia and offer her a better future. She just never had the startup capital, the cash flow to begin, or the knowledge of how to do it. I want to invest in that, Arthur, not as charity, but as an investment in an entrepreneur. I'll be the angel investor, and she'll be the manager. The profit will be hers, and she can use what she earns to pay the rent on the new house until she can buy it. This would give her the independence she values so much, and the house would be purchased in the company's name, so it doesn't feel like a direct gift." Cecilia, next to Isabella, nodded, her eyes shining with new hope, but also with tears of gratitude she could no longer hold back. "It's the only way I would accept, Mr. Vance. To work for it," she managed to say, her voice choked. Arthur was in shock. His wife, the woman he thought he knew so well, had transformed. It was a brilliant plan, one that combined business pragmatism with human sensitivity, something he, with all his experience in the stock market and fund management, had failed to conceive. Isabella had seen dignity where he had only seen need, and she had found a solution that respected Cecilia's pride. The turning point wasn't just Isabella's proposal. It was the revelation of a depth and compassion in his wife he never suspected existed. It was proof that empathy can emerge in the most unexpected places, breaking through the barriers of privilege. Arthur looked at Isabella, and for the first time in years, he saw her in a new light, not just as his wife, but as a woman of strength and emotional intelligence he had underestimated. What this meant for the future of his own family, he didn't yet know, but one thing was certain: this Christmas would be the beginning of a transformation that would go far beyond Sophia's recovery. He felt that his own journey was just beginning, and that the challenges, both emotional and practical, were still to come. Isabella's proposal reverberated through the hospital corridors, a dissonant melody amidst the silence of Arthur's dilemmas. He, the tycoon accustomed to commanding teams and closing multi-million-dollar deals, now faced a business plan devised by his own wife, a woman whom, until then, he had seen as a decorative figure in his life of wealth and ostentation. The turnaround was as unexpected as it was impactful. Isabella, with her idea of an investment in Cecilia, not only offered a solution to the housekeeper's situation, but also exposed the superficiality of his own generosity. It was a plan that respected dignity, a concept he, in his relentless pursuit of profit and capital, had neglected. The following days were a period of unusual activity at the Vance estate. Isabella, with a determination Arthur had never witnessed, dove headfirst into the project. She consulted business lawyers and social workers, researched the cleaning services market, and even interviewed some of Cecilia's friends who had experience in the field. Arthur's vast net worth, which had once been a barrier, now became a facilitator, but in a completely new way. Isabella wasn't asking for money to donate. She was asking to invest, to create an opportunity. Arthur watched his wife with a mixture of admiration and a pang of shame. While he had struggled with the emotional complexities of offering help, Isabella had found a bridge. She, who once worried about the next piece of jewelry or the latest stock market trends, now spoke with passion about initial cash flow, marketing strategies for the new business, and profitability expectations. This was an Isabella he didn't know, a woman with a purpose that went beyond the luxuries of her life. Lucas and Laura, meanwhile, continued to visit Sophia in the hospital. The girl's illness had ignited in them a flame of empathy that Arthur never imagined possible. Laura would draw pictures for Sophia, bring her favorite toys, and talk softly to her, even when the girl was sleeping. Lucas, more introverted, would spend hours reading to the girl, choosing stories of superheroes and fairy tales in an attempt to transport her away from the hospital reality. They began to question things, to see the world with new eyes. "Dad, why don't some kids have houses?" Laura asked one day, sitting on the Persian rug in the living room. Lucas, for the first time, agreed. "It's weird, right, Dad? We have so much stuff, so much money saved in gold and everything, and some people don't even have a place to live." The words of his children, which would have once been ignored in his quest for profit and investments, now hit him hard. They were a mirror of his former disconnection, and now they were also the catalyst for his transformation. The important subplot unfolding was the redefinition of his own family, the deconstruction of the bubble of privilege Arthur had created. Meanwhile, Sophia's recovery was slow but progressive. She was still fragile, but the fever had subsided, and her cough had diminished. Cecilia, with a renewed spark of hope in her eyes, began to divide her time between the hospital and meetings with Isabella, learning about management, budgets, and how to build a solid business. Arthur, seeing Cecilia's determination and Isabella's passion, began to get more actively involved. He would not only provide the initial capital, but also lend his business acumen, sharing his decades of experience in successful stock investments and asset management. He felt reinvigorated, with a new purpose that went beyond the mere accumulation of wealth. This was not just a financial investment. It was an investment in lives, in dignity, in a future. The light in Cecilia's eyes, Isabella's renewed passion, and his children's growing empathy were the true dividends of this journey. However, the calm was only apparent. The reality of Cecilia's life still held deep scars. One day, while discussing the details of the business plan in a meeting room at the mansion, Cecilia hesitated. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance, I need to confess something. I don't have all my documents. Some were lost in the eviction and others are expired. And Sophia's birth certificate, it's old and might need to be updated for all this." The air in the room grew thick. Bureaucracy, the fourth obstacle, had reappeared, a cruel reminder of the difficulties faced by those living on the margins. Arthur felt a tightness in his chest. It was a problem that his money, his stocks, his gold could not solve directly. But now, he had a purpose and a family that was uniting to help. He knew he would face this challenge with renewed determination, knowing that the future of Cecilia and Sophia and the transformation of his own family depended on it. The road would be long, but he was ready to walk every step, aware that true wealth was not in bank accounts, but in the human connections he was finally learning to build. Christmas was approaching, and with it, the promise of a new beginning, but also the uncertainty of how all the pieces would come together. Cecilia's confession about the missing documents hung in the air like a dark cloud, threatening to overshadow the glow of new hope. For Arthur, a man who lived in a world of ironclad contracts and the impeccable bureaucracy that governed his millions in investments and his dollar-denominated net worth, Cecilia's situation was almost unimaginable. How could someone lose such essential documents? But then he remembered the tenement, the urgency of the eviction, the chaos of a life in constant precarity, and he understood. His vast assets and investment funds protected him from such realities. But for Cecilia, the struggle was daily. Isabella, however, showed no discouragement. On the contrary, her gaze grew even more intense. "Don't worry, Cecilia," she said, her voice firm and full of conviction. "We'll sort this out. Arthur has an excellent legal team. They can help us." Isabella's confidence was a balm, and Arthur felt a wave of gratitude for his wife, who was proving to be a force he never knew she possessed. The next few days were dedicated to battling bureaucracy. Arthur's lawyers, accustomed to handling complex stock negotiations and international contracts, were now tasked with recovering birth certificates, identity documents, and regularizing the situation for Cecilia and Sophia. It was an arduous process, filled with trips to the county clerk's office and public agencies, filling out forms, and a great deal of patience. Arthur, who would have previously delegated these tasks without a second thought, now got personally involved, tracking every step, understanding the nuances and difficulties Cecilia had faced alone for so long. He saw the irony. All his capital, his fortune, his profits couldn't speed up the slowness of a system that seemed designed to make life harder for the most vulnerable. While the bureaucracy ran its course, Sophia continued her gradual recovery in the hospital. The medical team, aware of Arthur and Isabella's involvement, gave her extra attention. The girl was receiving the nutrients she had lacked for so long, and the medication was working. Her eyes, once lifeless, were beginning to regain their sparkle, and a faint but genuine smile occasionally lit up her face. Lucas and Laura continued to visit her, the bond between the children growing stronger each day. They brought books, simple games, and told stories of their own lives, a life that, for the first time, they were beginning to question and appreciate from a new perspective. Laura, in particular, developed a special affection for Sophia. She would spend hours by the girl's bed, coloring pictures and whispering childhood secrets. One day, Laura told Arthur she had donated some of her toys to other children at the shelter where Sophia had been. "They have nothing, Dad. It's so sad," she said, her eyes welling up. Lucas, in turn, suggested that instead of so many expensive gifts, they could use part of the dividends from their own stock holdings to help more families. The transformation of his children was palpable, and Arthur felt a pride that surpassed any business success. The third week of December came to an end, and with it, the most awaited news. Cecilia's and Sophia's documents were in order. Arthur's legal team had managed to overcome all obstacles, and Sophia's updated birth certificate was tangible proof that a new chapter was beginning. That small piece of paper was more valuable to Arthur than any Bitcoin statement or fund performance report. With the paperwork in order, Isabella could finalize the details of the house purchase. It wasn't a mansion like theirs, but a cozy home in a quiet neighborhood, with a small yard where Sophia could play safely. The purchase was made in the name of the company to be managed by Cecilia, ensuring the dignity and independence she so cherished. Arthur saw the light in Cecilia's eyes when Isabella showed her photos of the house. It was a glimmer of hope, of a future that had seemed impossible just weeks before. But as if fate wanted to test the limits of his newfound humanity, a new and impactful major twist was about to be revealed. As Sophia recovered, one of the doctors asked to speak with Arthur and Cecilia privately. He held the results of more in-depth tests that had been done to understand the extent of Sophia's malnutrition. The doctor's expression was serious, and Arthur felt a chill. What else could there be? He had prepared himself for everything, or so he thought, but the truth the doctor revealed hit him with a force that left him breathless, a new blow that made him question everything he had done so far. Sophia's illness was more serious than it seemed, and the cause was even more devastating, a consequence of months of precarious living conditions. The fragility of life and the responsibility of his wealth had never been so clear. The cold doctor's office seemed to shrink around Arthur and Cecilia. The physician, with a grave expression, held Sophia's latest test results. The air was thick, heavy with a tension that Arthur, accustomed to handling high risks and swift decisions in the world of investments, felt weighing on him in a unique way. He had grown used to the idea of pneumonia and malnutrition, But the doctor's expression suggested something deeper, something beyond the initial explanations. His vast net worth, his assets, his capital accumulated in stocks and gold, all seemed irrelevant in the face of Sophia's fragile life. "Cecilia, Mr. Vance," the doctor began, his voice soft but firm. "The more detailed tests have revealed that Sophia's pneumonia, while severe, was a trigger for something more complex. The chronic malnutrition, combined with months of precarious living conditions, not only weakened her, but also caused significant damage to her immune system and bone development. She shows signs of severe osteopenia, a marked bone fragility, and her respiratory system has deeper lesions than we thought, making her more susceptible to future infections. It wasn't just the recent cold, it was a process of months, of a lifetime in subhuman conditions." The third and most impactful major twist struck Arthur like lightning. It wasn't just a matter of treating an acute illness. It was the realization of profound and prolonged damage, a physical scar from a life of deprivation. Sophia's illness was not an isolated event, but the culmination of months of invisible suffering. The image of the girl, always quiet, always small for her age, now transformed in his mind, revealing the unbearable weight of her existence. His eyes filled with tears, and he felt a tightness in his chest that surpassed any pain he had ever experienced. He, the billionaire who boasted of profits and dividends, felt like a silent accomplice to that cruel reality. Cecilia broke down. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face, and she sobbed uncontrollably. The guilt, the pain, the desperation of a mother who couldn't protect her child from the brutality of poverty were palpable. Arthur reached out his hand and, for the first time, touched hers, a gesture of silent solidarity. There were no words, only the shared pain of a reality he, in his bubble of privilege, had never allowed himself to see. The doctor explained that Sophia would need intensive, long-term care, respiratory physiotherapy, nutritional supplementation, orthopedic monitoring. It would be an arduous path, and full recovery would take time and require constant dedication. He also reinforced the need for a stable, healthy environment for Sophia's body to fully recover. That moment was a watershed for Arthur. He realized the help he was offering couldn't be merely reactive, a response to a crisis. It had to be proactive, a long-term commitment. His role wasn't just to pay bills or solve bureaucratic hurdles. It was to secure a future, a dignified life for Sophia and Cecilia. Back at the mansion, the glow of the Christmas decorations seemed even more hollow. Arthur walked through the lavish halls, looking at the expensive gifts piled under the tree, symbols of a wealth that now seemed empty to him. His own children, Lucas and Laura, played in a corner, oblivious to the depth of the revelation. He felt a lump in his throat. All those luxurious decorations, all his investments and his capital seemed insignificant compared to the value of a child simply having a safe, warm home. The true meaning of Christmas, of generosity, of human connection, was revealing itself to him in a painful and transformative way. He called Isabella into his study and, in a choked voice, told her the new revelation. Isabella, with a sensitivity Arthur had never attributed to her, listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. "Arthur," she said, her voice soft, "we will take care of them. We will ensure Sophia has everything she needs to recover, and we will do more." That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. The image of Sophia, with her fragile bones and compromised lungs, haunted him. He found himself reflecting on his life, on the relentless pursuit of profit, of assets, of a fortune that had isolated him from the true essence of humanity. His businesses, his returns, his cash flow, it all seemed to empty of meaning. He realized that his wealth was not just a privilege. It was a responsibility, a power he had underutilized for so long. The decision was made. He would not only pay for all of Sophia's medical treatments, but also ensure that she and Cecilia had permanent stability. The house, once a goal for Cecilia's business, now became an urgent necessity, a safe and warm home for Sophia to recover. But he felt that still wasn't enough. Sophia's pain had opened his eyes to a much larger reality, to the countless Sophias that existed in his city, in his country. He had to do more, had to transform the initial shock into systematic action, into a legacy of true benevolence. Christmas was approaching, and with it, the promise of a resolution, but also the certainty that Arthur's transformation was just beginning, and that a new purpose had been born in his heart. Christmas Eve approached with a bittersweet atmosphere at the Vance estate. The twinkling lights, Christmas carols, and the scent of pine mingled with the shadow of concern that hung over the family. Sophia, though stable, remained in the hospital, her recovery a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the brutality of social inequality. Arthur, who once felt at the pinnacle of success with his vast net worth in dollars and euros, now found himself in a moment of deep reflection on the true value of his fortune and investments. The profit, the dividends, the accumulated assets. It all seemed empty compared to the dull glimmer in a child's eyes. Isabella, with a strength and purpose Arthur had never witnessed, became the bridge between their world and the reality of Cecilia and Sophia. She coordinated with the lawyers to expedite the house's paperwork, chose the most suitable furniture for the new home, and ensured that every detail for the mother and daughter's comfort was being arranged. Her involvement was total, and Arthur felt a growing admiration for his wife. She, who once cared about fashion and the social events of her wealthy circle, now spoke with passion about the importance of healthy eating and physiotherapy for Sophia. Lucas and Laura also continued their regular hospital visits. The experience had matured them both in a remarkable way. Laura, with her sweetness, read stories to Sophia and made colorful drawings that brightened the hospital room. Lucas, the initially indifferent teenager, spent hours researching malnutrition and osteopenia, looking for ways to help with his friend's recovery. He even proposed to Arthur that part of the profits from his own investments and funds be used to create a support project for underprivileged children. "Dad, we have so much money in stocks, gold, Bitcoin. We can't just watch people suffer," Lucas said one day, his eyes, once focused on video games, now shining with purpose. Those words from his own children were a powerful catalyst for Arthur. His family's transformation was deeper than he had imagined. They were dismantling the bubble of privilege he had built over the years, a bubble fueled by an obsession with work and a disconnection from reality. He realized that true wealth was not in his assets, but in the ability to use that wealth to make a difference in people's lives. Arthur visited Sophia every day, sitting by her bedside, talking softly, reading to her, and sometimes just watching her sleep. Each day, he saw small progress, a new sparkle in her eyes, a more spontaneous smile. The first victory, seeing Sophia recover, came at the cost of confronting his own social blindness. He had been a man who accumulated a fortune, but was blind to human suffering. Now, with every breath Sophia took, he felt a rebirth within himself. With Cecilia and Sophia's house finally purchased and furnished, Isabella arranged a small visit for Cecilia. The housekeeper, with teary eyes, walked through each room, touching the freshly painted walls, the new stove, the clean sheets on Sophia's bed. It was a home, a safe place, a refuge she and her daughter had never had. Cecilia's gratitude was immense, but there was also a dignity in her gaze, the certainty that she would work hard to honor this opportunity. However, Arthur knew that Sophia's battle was not over. Physical recovery was only part of the process. Rebuilding her life, ensuring a future with health and opportunities, was a long-term commitment. And for Arthur, the transformation of his own perspective on wealth and social responsibility was far from complete. He sat in his office, the light from the Christmas tree filtering through the windows, and picked up Sophia's crumpled letter, the one he had rescued from the trash weeks ago. He reread the childish words asking for a home and felt a wave of emotion. That letter, so small and fragile, had been the catalyst for a seismic shift in his life and the lives of his family. What he would do next, how he would turn this epiphany into a lasting legacy, was still an open question. But one thing was certain: he would never go back to being the man he was before. Christmas, once just a date on his business calendar, was about to become the symbol of a new beginning, a new way of living, where the true value of wealth lay not in what one accumulated, but in what one shared, and where purpose surpassed profit. The moment of greatest tension and emotional resolution was approaching, and Arthur was ready to face it. Christmas Eve arrived, bringing with it not the usual festive joy to the Vance estate, but a palpable emotional tension, a silent climax that hung over everyone. Sophia, despite her progress, was still in the hospital, her presence there a constant reminder of the journey Arthur had begun. The luxurious house, once a sanctuary of privilege, now seemed a monument to his former social blindness. All the lavish decorations, the expensive gifts piled under the tree, the vast net worth in dollars and euros he had accumulated, felt empty compared to the value of a child simply having a safe, warm home. Arthur spent most of his time at the hospital, sitting by Sophia's bed. He read to her, told her stories, and sometimes just held her small hand. The girl, still pale but with a renewed sparkle in her eyes, could now smile more often. Her mother, Cecilia, divided her time between the hospital and preparing to move into the new house, which was now a reality. The flame of hope in her eyes was the greatest Christmas gift Arthur could receive. She, who once feared losing her job if she appeared needy, now looked at Arthur with gratitude and a mutual respect that transcended social barriers. On Christmas Eve morning, as the Vance estate prepared for the traditional family dinner, Arthur received a call from the hospital. The doctor's voice was grave. Sophia had had a small setback. Nothing serious enough to reverse her progress, but a scare, a reminder of her ongoing fragility and the deep damage caused by months of deprivation. Arthur's heart tightened. It was as if the universe was giving him one last lesson, one final test that the journey of overcoming was continuous and required constant vigilance. He rushed to the hospital, leaving behind his wife and children who were preparing for dinner. When he arrived, he found Cecilia in tears, sitting by Sophia's bed. The girl was asleep, but her breathing seemed a little heavier. Arthur sat beside Cecilia and without hesitation embraced her. It was not an embrace of pity, but of solidarity from a man who finally understood her pain and her struggle. "She's going to be okay, Cecilia," Arthur whispered, feeling tears stream down his own face. "We're going to make sure of it. No matter what happens, I'm here. We're here." In that moment, all barriers between them crumbled. Wealth, gold investments, stocks, business profits, it all became secondary. What mattered was Sophia's life, Cecilia's dignity, the human connection he had discovered. Isabella arrived shortly after Till, accompanied by Lucas and Laura. They had decided to postpone dinner to be with Sophia and Cecilia. Laura, her eyes red from crying, held Sophia's tiny hand, while Lucas, with a look of unusual seriousness for his age, stood by Arthur's side. That small hospital room, with its smell of antiseptic and dim light, became the setting for the Vances' true Christmas dinner, a moment of unity and purpose that surpassed any previous celebration. Arthur looked at his family, at Isabella, who had transformed so profoundly, at his children, who had awakened to a reality far greater than their privileges, and at Cecilia, who was now more than an employee. She was part of the family, a figure of strength and resilience. He felt a wave of gratitude and humility. Sophia's letter to Santa Claus, which he had rescued from the trash, had triggered a revolution in his own soul. In that instant, Arthur understood the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't about what one accumulated in banks or high-risk investments, but about what one built in terms of human connections, support, and opportunities. His fortune, his capital, his assets were no longer just for his own comfort and power. They were tools for a greater good, for justice, for overcoming, for the human connection he had so long neglected. As Sophia slept, Laura's small hand holding hers, Arthur made a silent promise. He would not only ensure Sophia's full recovery and Cecilia's stability, he would do more. He would transform the shock and pain he had experienced into action. This Christmas, which began with the sorrow of a desperate letter, was about to become the start of a legacy of altruism and true social responsibility. He felt that a new chapter, not just in Sophia's life, but in his own, was about to begin. A chapter where compassion and purpose would replace the old obsession with profit. The emotional tension was dissipating, making way for a resolution that promised to be transformative, and he was ready to embrace it. Christmas morning dawned over the city with a soft veil of snow. But in Sophia's hospital room, the atmosphere was one of a new beginning. The small setback from the night before had been overcome, and the girl, though still fragile, showed clear signs of improvement. Arthur, Isabella, Lucas, and Laura, exhausted but with lighter hearts, had spent the night there, beside Cecilia, in a display of unity that transcended all barriers. The simple room, with its scent of antiseptic, had become the epicenter of a profound transformation for the Vance family, where the true value of capital and fortune was being redefined. With Sophia's improvement, the doctors gave permission for her to be transferred to Cecilia's new house as soon as she was discharged, which would be in a few days. It was a small victory, but it meant a great deal. Arthur had already ensured that all medical treatments, physical therapy, and nutritional support would be ongoing and fully funded. It wasn't a matter of charity, but of an unwavering commitment. His vast net worth, once a source of ostentation, was now a tool for healing and restoring a life. The resolution of the main conflicts began with the house. Isabella, with the help of a team of designers, had transformed the property into a cozy home, with a special room for Sophia, filled with vibrant colors and toys carefully selected by Laura and Lucas. The house wasn't just a roof, it was a symbol of security, hope, and a new start for Cecilia and Sophia. Isabella's business plan for Cecilia also took shape. The cleaning company, named Bright Dawn Cleaning, was officially registered. Arthur, with his experience in business management and investments, helped draft a solid strategic plan, ensuring Cecilia had all the tools and support needed for success. He not only provided the startup capital, but also committed to being a mentor, offering his knowledge on cash flow, profitability, and personnel management. Cecilia, with a sparkle in her eyes and renewed determination, was ready to embrace this new phase of her life, not as a recipient of aid, but as an entrepreneur. Lucas and Laura, in turn, continued to surprise Arthur with their growing social awareness. They became regular volunteers at city shelters, bringing clothes, toys, and books to other vulnerable children. Lucas, with his analytical mind, began researching support programs for young entrepreneurs with the idea of creating a social investment fund, using part of the income from his own assets to help people like Cecilia start their own businesses. Laura, more practical, organized a food and clothing drive at school, getting her classmates involved in the cause. Arthur's transformation was the most notable. He was no longer the cold, work-obsessed man he had been before. His eyes once focused on spreadsheets and stock market reports, now saw the world with new depth. He divested from some of his less essential businesses, dedicating more time to his family and social projects. Superficial generosity was replaced by genuine altruism, and his connection to the reality of the less fortunate was now a driver for his actions. On a sunny day shortly after Christmas, Cecilia and Sophia were finally discharged from the hospital. Arthur, Isabella, Lucas, and Laura were there to greet them. The emotion was palpable. Upon arriving at the new house, Sophia ran to her room, exploring every corner with a quiet but visible joy. Cecilia, with tears in her eyes, hugged Arthur and Isabella. "I can never thank you enough for everything you've done," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "There's nothing to thank us for, Cecilia," Isabella replied, holding her hand. "We just did what was right." Arthur, with a warm smile, added, "This is just the first of many victories, Cecilia. Now it's your turn to shine, to build your own future, and we'll be here to support you." The story of the Vances and of Cecilia and Sophia was far from a fairy tale, but it was a testament to human resilience, the strength of connection, and the transformative power of empathy. The note to Santa Claus that spoke of survival had become the catalyst for a profound change in everyone's life. Arthur, once a disconnected millionaire, had found the real treasure, the ability to make a difference. The resolution of the emotional conflicts was completing, and each character was finding their own path to a satisfying and realistic outcome. What remained now was the future, a future that, for all of them, promised to be brighter and full of purpose. 4 weeks had passed since that fateful day when Arthur Vance rescued a crumpled letter from the trash, a letter that, written in a child's hand, revealed a desperate plea for a home. The Vance estate, once a haven of privilege and opulence, now radiated a new energy, a mix of genuine generosity and renewed purpose. The Christmas lights, which had witnessed Arthur's epiphany, stayed on longer that year, a symbol of the light that had ignited in the family's hearts. Sophia, now in her new home, was blossoming like a flower, finally receiving sun and water. Her health improved daily with the treatments and proper nutrition. The respiratory physiotherapy exercises and nutritional monitoring were routine, and she was already playing in the small yard with an energy that once seemed impossible. Her eyes, once haunted, shone with the innocent joy of a child who finally felt safe and loved. The contrast with her condition from weeks ago was a living testament to the power of compassion and support. Cecilia, for her part, was radiant. Bright Dawn Cleaning, her company, was thriving. With the startup capital provided by Isabella and Arthur's mentorship, she had assembled a small team and was already serving several clients, including some of Arthur and Isabella's contacts. She managed the business with a dedication and shrewdness that impressed everyone. The independence she so cherished was now a tangible reality, built with her own effort and the opportunity she was given. She looked at Arthur and Isabella no longer as her employers, but as friends and partners, a human connection worth more than any gold or Bitcoin. The transformation in the Vance family was equally profound. Arthur, the billionaire once obsessed with his investments and vast net worth, now dedicated a significant portion of his time to social causes. He had established an assistance program for employees in hardship, ensuring no one in his company would have to go through the same situation as Cecilia and Sophia. His second victory, transforming the initial shock into systematic action, was proof of his new purpose. He had also begun investing in affordable housing and education projects, using his fortune to build a better future for entire communities. His profit was no longer just about himself, but about the impact he could generate. Isabella, the driving force behind the solution, continued to be the soul of the family's social projects. She became actively involved in initiatives for female empowerment and support for single mothers, using her influence and resources to create opportunities for other women. Lucas and Laura, Arthur's children, had become young activists. Lucas, with his strategic mind, had launched a project to teach financial literacy to underprivileged youth, encouraging them to dream of a future of independence. Laura, with her empathy, continued to lead collection drives and visit shelters, sharing the lesson that the greatest gift is generosity. The inheritance Arthur was building for them now included not just material assets, but a legacy of social responsibility and compassion. On a sunny late afternoon, Sophia sat at the kitchen table in her new home, the afternoon sun streaming through the window. She took a piece of paper and a pencil, the same kind she had used to write her letter to Santa Claus. This time, her movements were steadier, and her face wore a radiant smile. She began to write, her childish handwriting now seeming so full of hope. "Dear Uncle Arthur and Aunt Isabella, thank you for everything. For giving me a warm house, for taking care of me and Mommy. I'm okay now, and Mommy is happy with her job. You are like Santa Claus, but better because you are real. I love you. With lots of love, Sophia." Upon receiving the letter, Arthur felt an emotion that surpassed any financial success he had ever achieved. That letter, which should have been about toys but spoke of survival, had become the catalyst for a profound change in the lives of everyone involved. The ending was complete and satisfying, with a hopeful tone and a positive message. The greatest gift doesn't come wrapped in colorful paper, but written in tears of hope by a child who dreamed only of the basics, a safe home where she could sleep in peace. The story ended, but the legacy of compassion and transformation of Arthur Vance and his family was just beginning, a testament that true wealth lies in the ability to touch and transform lives.